I'm still alive, if you were wondering. For the most part, I've avoided the things that Propescu sent after me, including the human ones. I killed one other creature after Mariana, and I'm not even sure what it was. A sort of half-breed, I think. Strong as hell. I emptied an entire clip from a 357 SIG into the bastard, and that barely slowed him down. But it slowed him down enough for me to sever head from spine with the 2-foot wakizashi I carried under the back of my coat. That did the job. I've changed my hair color and grown a beard. There's also a fresh scar on my face. I had a busy few days south of the border. Before my encounter with the half-breed, I had carefully called in a couple favors which led me to a modern-day armorer in western Brazil. Let's call him Gomez. And you won't find him online. He caters to a very niche market. From Gomez, I was able to get what I needed. A neat crossbow, small but powerful, complete with 20 bolts crafted from Libidibia ferra, Brazilian ironwood. The bolts needed to be blessed and sanctified by submerging each in holy water in order to be effective against Homo Nosferatu vampires. That's what I did with the wooden knife. If you didn't do this, it was just wood. Thankfully, I was in a place where the church didn't ask too many questions once the donation was big enough. I smiled at the irony of it. I hadn't gone to church in 20 years, and when I finally did, it was for weapons to kill a vampire. Gomez it was who made me the wakizashi, along with a double-edged tsurugi. The swords were forged from spring steel mixed with chromium and silicone. None of that silver bullshit, which is just too soft. Although, I confess, I did have Gomez make me a 5-inch rounded silver dagger. I mean, you can't be too careful. Gomez even found me a few rounds of incendiary ammunition for my 357 SIG. I knew I couldn't run forever. One of those things would get me eventually. There was only one way that this had any sort of positive ending, and if I had to die, I'd rather burn up than fade away, as they say. In fact, with Propescu, I might be lucky if I died at all, but I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. There are always ways to move about, secret networks forged over the years of covert dealings, whether by cartels or by the government. You just needed the right access code and those pathways opened up, taking you wherever you needed to be. Which is how I ended up back in New York 4 days later, fresh credentials and all. I knew I couldn't get to Propescu directly. His estate was simply too heavily guarded. I had to draw him out. The prey would be luring out the predator, but it was what I had to do. I'm sure Propescu was unaware that I was back in the country, but I didn't think that would hold for long. I had the element of surprise for now, and whatever needed to be done quickly. In the 3 weeks before I took the shot that ended my career, I had studied Propescu's movements closely. There were few weaknesses to exploit. He had a regimented schedule and was always surrounded by armed guards. Armed guards and the gaunt woman in the white dress. She was always there, maybe not at Propescu's side, but always behind him, in the frame or in the room, and always wearing white. Now that I thought about it, she was the woman who got splattered behind him when I blew his brains out. A shot that should have killed him. Maybe I had my leverage. I bided my time and surveilled the gaunt woman. She would occasionally leave the property on her own with 2 guards, sometimes 1. She would do this during daylight hours also, so she could not be a vampire in the traditional sense. I did recall reading about familiars. These are humans who had pledged themselves to the service of a vampire. This precious gem of info I gleaned from, well, a graphic novel called Blade. Hey, I was in new territory and winging it, okay? Besides, didn't Alexandru say there were kernels of truth hidden within legends? My plan was simple. I would take the gaunt woman and hope it was bait enough to draw out Propescu. I had a safe space in Jersey where I could hunker down. This time, I'd do the job right. It was a risk I was taking, a risk that she meant something to the vampire. But what choice did I have? As we know all too well, however, plans don't always go the way you hope. My opportunity came as it happened, the very next day. A heavily tinted SUV left the compound with a gaunt woman in the back and with only one driver/bodyguard. I jumped on the Harley-Davidson Iron 1200 I had recently acquired and fell in pursuit. Propescu's compound was in the East Village and had been in his family since the 19th century. 40 minutes later, the SUV pulled into an alley alongside a quaint apothecary shop in Queens. I drew up a bit past the alley, got off the bike, and quickly walked back. I got to the entrance just in time to see the gaunt woman enter a side door of the apothecary shop, while the driver/bodyguard stood outside and waited. He was a big son of a bitch, but I've dealt with bigger. I just hoped he wasn't one of those half-breed things. I slipped quietly behind a dumpster where I could observe my quarry without being seen. About 20 minutes later, the gaunt woman emerged from the side door, a small paper bag in hand, and the door shut behind her. I moved quickly. I bolted toward the bodyguard, my .357 in hand. Even as he reached into his coat, I put one in his heart and one dead center of his forehead. The incendiaries burnt flesh, but it was just flesh after all, and by the time he fell, I was already upon the gaunt woman. She was about to shout when I smashed the gun into the side of her head, and she crumpled, dropping the paper bag to the ground. I secured her wrists with plastic ties and searched through the guard's coat, where I found the key fob for the SUV. I loaded the woman in and sped out of the alley. 3 blocks further down, I pulled into a small parking garage and jacked an old model Chevy. The gaunt woman was still out, and I didn't want to take the chance that the SUV had GPS. It was an hour or so before sunset when I pulled into the seemingly abandoned building in an old Newark industrial area. I drove the Chevy into the garage and lowered the doors. This little flat cost me a lot of money. It looked old and run down from the outside, but it boasted reinforced walls and doors, an encrypted communications and monitoring system, a small armory, and CCTV covering every inch inside and out. I even had my own little holding cell, where I deposited my guest. By now, Propescu would know what had happened, and shit was most certainly hitting the fan. I retrieved a small video camera and proceeded to record a short message featuring my guest prominently behind me. "Florin, you undead asshole," I began. "I have something that belongs to you," I said, hoping I hadn't pulled a blank. "If you want to see her in one piece again, then here's what you must do," I said, mulling over my planned ambush. At the very worst, if he didn't give a shit about the gaunt woman, I hoped to piss him off enough that he would most certainly come for me. When I had finished, I uploaded and sent the message, through encryption, direct to his phone. Now for the hard part. I waited. A flutter in my peripheral vision caused me to draw my sidearm and bring it out. The gaunt lady was up. She sat on the cot, in the small 6x6 cell, wrists bound in front of her, and watched me. "Welcome back," I said. "Want some water?" I picked up a bottle and slowly walked over to her cell, holding it out in front of me with my left hand, the pistol drawn but facing downward on my right. Still, she only stared. She was gaunt to the point of being almost skeletal, pale hair pulled back in a bun and tied. She had striking Native American features and shallow skin. It was difficult to determine her age. She could be 20 or 40. Her black eyes followed my every move, and she still remained silent. I walked up to the small opening in the front door of the cell and tossed the water, some primitive fear in the back of my mind that she'd sprang at me with perpetual speed. Nothing happened. She just stared, didn't even fidget when the bottle landed on her cot. She watched me the way you'd look at a dog that had been nabbed by the dog catchers. Pitying. I almost shot her right there. The minutes went by slowly, agonizingly. I sat on a stool facing the cell, back against the wall, and closed my eyes. I didn't even realize I had drifted close to sleep when a voice from in front of me startled me awake. I fell off the stool, rolled once to the right, and came up with my cig in both hands, trained at the cell. The woman was standing now, holding onto the bars. Her eyes were turned up, only white showing. But that wasn't the strangest thing. It was the voice. From her mouth came an unnatural sound, a mixture between a man and a woman's voice, but the accent, well, the accent I'd heard before. Florin Propescu. "Mr. Stone, I don't know whether to be angry or impressed. You have shown yourself to be both courageous and resourceful, if somewhat of a fool. You know this only has one ending, Mr. Stone, and it's not a happy one. Not for you. In fact," there was a pause, "I mean to give you my personal attention for that bullet you put in my head." A sigh, then, "Juliet, whose company you now keep, is a dear to me, yes, but not so dear as to be irreplaceable. Mr. Stone, maybe you should answer your door." Propescue's puppet smiled. Shit. I had been so focused on the strange voice coming from the gaunt woman, I didn't notice the monitors. Even as she slumped to the floor of her cell, Propescu having taken his leave, I saw that I had problems. So the gaunt woman was linked to the vampire, a kind of human GPS. My bad for not having thought of something like that, but again, this was all new to me. I saw one of those black SUVs pull up to the house. Two of Propescue's goons got out. Just two, Florin? Well, as they say, pride goeth before a fall. One of them opened the back door and stepped out. Propescu himself. He was dressed in a dark, sleek suit, complete with a red shirt and black tie, dark glasses on, and carrying the same walking stick I had seen before. He had black shoulder-length hair, slicked back, colored with flecks of gray. He stared at the camera and smiled, a smile surely designed to display the fangs that filled his mouth. Not two, as some of those old vampire movies featured. Instead, his mouth seemed brimming with teeth. Well, at least I got you out of your stinking hole. The air was suddenly filled with some kind of weird chanting in a language I had never heard. It was like breaking glass searing into my brain. The gaunt woman was back on her feet, staring directly at me, and her eyes were white before. Now there was only blackness. She seemed to be mouthing some incantation, and I could feel myself starting to swoon. I felt my knees shaking my head hard. It cleared enough that I saw the crossbow on the table in front of me. Instinct took over. I loaded, turned, and fired all in one motion, and from less than 8 feet away, the iron bolt crunched into her chest. She staggered backward. I reloaded and pumped 2 more bolts into her. Thick, black blood spurted from her wounds. It had a sickly, foul smell, making me gag. I was just about to fire another bolt when I saw her shudder uncontrollably, with an unnatural violence. Then she fell flat on her back, eyes glossing over, the same black goo running from the sides of her mouth. I knew she was dead when I heard a howl from outside. It was animalistic, wolf-like, a howl of pain and rage mixed into one, and I knew Propescu was coming for me right now. I slung the tsurugi across my back and tied the wakizashi down my left thigh. The wooden dagger was strapped across the left side of my chest, and the sig was tucked into the small of my back. I carried the crossbow in my hands. I had a number of weapons in the small armory I kept there, but I'm not sure what good they would do. I did retrieve a couple of frag grenades, though, and slipped them into my pocket. Well, if this was to be the end, then I would make it one bloody son of a bitch, I thought. There was a heavy thud at the door to the rear, where the small kitchenette was. This was followed by a steady pounding. That door was made of 1-inch reinforced steel, but it sounded like the biggest sledgehammer in the world was being thrown at it. I sprinted to the door and slid open the 4-inch square peephole I had built into it. I poked the sig through and held down the trigger, sending a full clip of incendiaries into the hulking bastard standing at the back. I slammed the peephole shut and looked back at the monitor covering the back of the house to see the creature clutch what was left of its face. There were flames bursting through his fingers, and soon his entire head exploded. I smiled with grim satisfaction, but that had been my last clip of incendiary. Almost before the thing hit the ground, his place had been taken by the other one. There was no sign of Propescu. Suddenly, silence. The pounding stopped, leaving only a ringing in my ears. I looked at the monitors. I could see no one. Then, one by one, the cameras started to go down. Soon I was staring at blank monitors. They had taken away my electronic eyes. I was still brooding over this when I heard an explosion from the back, just as a wall of air slammed me against the wall. Stunned, I scrambled to a crouching position, my brain finally registering that one of these animals had brought along some good old C4. The smoke was still clearing when Unnatural Goon number 2 came rushing in. He was big, over 6 feet tall, and although he too wore a dark suit, it was easy to tell he was built like the rock under it. His eyes, though, they were as black as those of Juliet, who now lay in a bloody mess in the cell. He spotted me and crouched in the corner, and moved like lightning. The crossbow was still in my hand and I fired. He took it in the chest, but kept coming. Before I could reload, I felt clammy but powerful fingers close on my shoulders, and I was lifted up and flung across the room. I smashed into the table holding the monitoring equipment, sending sparks and electronics flying everywhere. I lost my grip on the crossbow. I could feel something warm starting to flow down the side of my head, soaking into my beard. My bottom lip was torn open, and a lump was already rising on the top of my head. He came at me again. The goon was raining blows down on me, and I was only just managing to fend them off, when one landed on the left side of my face. Stars swam before me as I felt the bone crunch. I pulled my legs up under me and kicked out, sending the bastard whirling. Blood flowed from my face now. It was a minor respite, but allowed me to yank the wakizashi free of its scabbard. Snarling, he came at me again, flexing the fingers in both hands. As he pounced upon me, I brought the short sword up. It impaled him through the abdomen, exiting from his upper back. The man-thing snarled at me, baring his teeth, and I twisted the blade, working it back and forth. It got his attention. He pulled away, the blade coming free with a sucking, popping sound. I tried to move in for the kill, but my left leg gave from under me and I almost fell over. There was a deep gash just above the knee. It saved my life. The creature slashed at the empty air where my head was just a moment before. Its momentum carried it past me, and I seized the chance. Dropping the short sword, I drew the surgi from across my back and brought the double-edged sword up to meet his neck. The cut was clean. The head went spinning into a corner while the rest of the body convulsed on the floor, spewing that black foul substance all over me. This time, I did throw up. I had just brought my hand up to wipe my mouth when the entire world erupted into a blinding light, followed only by blackness. I awoke to the smell of smoke, putrescence, and blood. I was lying on the asphalt behind my now breached stronghold. Black gore smeared me, mixed with my own blood. The dark sky loomed overhead. There were stars out despite the cold. It was as good a night to die as any, I thought, and then the pain lanced through what felt like my entire body. I winced and brought my hand up to my head, slowly sitting up. I was aware of a dark shadow off to my left, but I was not going to give that son of a bitch the pleasure of seeing me weak. It took great effort, but I eventually got to my feet. From behind me came a chuckle. Mr. Stone, so much effort. For what? You think this gives your death meaning? You think you've accomplished something? I felt a whoosh and suddenly he was in front of me, barely 1 foot away. His mouth seemed unnaturally wide, dozens of sharp, serrated teeth peering out as he opened and closed it. His complexion was pallid. Only the red lips stood out. His eyes were dog-like, changing color it seemed from yellow to red to orange. He smelled great though. What was that? Chanel Grand? His breath was another story altogether. It smelled of decay. Well, Mr. Stone, he said, his voice rising in pitch. You have my attention. Is this what you want? The eyes were now tiny points of red, the mouth convulsing, becoming almost snout-like. There was slimy drool running down the sides. I retreated 1 step, 2, 3, and he was upon me. I threw myself back, but his arms enveloped me, pinning my left arm to my body. And as we both fell, I felt those teeth sink into my left shoulder. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My throat locked by a terror I'd never known. God help me. For all my adult life, I'd been avoiding taking up your name, and I don't deserve an ounce of your pity, Lord, but the pain, it was excruciating. The tears welled up in my eyes, and I felt them run down my cheek. It was as if someone was sawing into my shoulder while pouring acid into the wound at the same time. The slurping sounds made me throw up again. That was my blood, my life being drawn out. Propescue pulled his head away, lifted it high to the sky, and inhaled deeply as I felt bits of flesh go with it. The next time he brought it down, it would be to take my life. I desperately reached out with my free right hand, and then remembered, like a light bulb in my head. I brought up my right leg and reached into the boot. I looked up to see that cavern of teeth dip toward me once more, but instead of finding flesh, it found 5 inches of silver dagger, buried to the hilt from under the chin up to his brain. The vampire screamed. It screamed and blood flowed from his mouth. The edges of the wound simmered. Like someone throwing bacon into very hot oil, Propescu pushed himself off and away from me and grabbed at the dagger with fingers that now resembled 7-inch talons. He could not get a decent grip and screamed again. The dagger hurt him, but it did not look like it would kill the creature. With every ounce of effort, I stood up. He was starting to work it free. I felt panic coming on, but then I felt something else. Something that was burning the left side of my chest. I shook away the cobwebs. It was the wooden dagger, blessed and sanctified by a South American priest, baptized with the blood of Mariana. I drew it out, just in time to see the vampire turn. He'd gotten the silver dagger out, and he wanted to finish this. I drew a deep breath, and anticipating his lunge, I opened my body up, letting his momentum bring him into me, and I drove the wooden blade into his heart. "That's for Mariana, you devil," I screamed as I threw myself to the ground and rolled as far as I could. Propescu had carried on a few feet past me, so I could not see his face. He appeared to be clutching his chest, but strangest of all, he made no sound. Not like when I'd stabbed him with the silver dagger. My heart fell, hopelessness creeping in. Did I miss? I was just about to resign myself that there was nothing more I could do when it came. It started softly at first, like a kettle building up steam. But soon I had to cover my ears. The scream was unearthly, reaching a pitch no normal creature could attain. I saw Propescu begin to shudder violently, with what looked like pieces of him flying in all directions. Slowly he started sinking to the ground, like one of those blow-up plastic men when you let all the air out. Then the smell hit me, like all the putrid things rolled into one, and for the second time that night, I threw up. Propescu was lying flat now, and even as he melted, he turned his head to me, hate in those red eyes, but it was a dimming light. The skin and flesh started falling off his face, running like a thick mixture. Soon I saw the skull, and the rows of teeth decaying now, teeth that had left a hole in my left shoulder, and had taken how many countless lives. Soon there was nothing but black dust, swept away by the night wind. And so the vampire Propescu met its end, in an old semi-abandoned industrial complex in Newark, New Jersey. I heard sirens off in the distance. Maybe our little escape had gotten someone's attention. I tossed both grenades into the safe house and ducked behind the SUV as they went off. The fire would hopefully destroy anything incriminating. It was the best I could do right now. I slipped behind the wheel and texted Jacobson, my intermediary. It was just before dawn when I pulled into the driveway of the house on 104th Avenue. I got out of the black SUV I was driving and slowly, painfully walked up to the front door. I patched up my shoulder and leg as best I could, but I had lost a lot of blood, and I felt as if I'd been run over by a train, by 2 trains actually. The sun broke over the horizon, pushing away the darkness. I suppose in time I'd find out which one of those stories was true, whether you turned when you were bitten, or whether you had to ingest the blood of a vampire. For now, I just enjoy the light on my face. There were certain matters to attend to, however, and I rang the doorbell.
Who is it?
It came from the intercom on the side of the door. "Good morning," I said. "This is John Stone, Mr. Alexandru, and I believe that you owe me $1 million.